I just received your the link of your film. It's very good. I was seeing it.
Yilmaz, Michele, am I pronouncing that right? Is it Michele?
It's Michele, but
Michele. Okay, all right. Michele.
We're both muted already.
Does that make sense?
okay.
All right. And then there'll be like a formal coming onto the stage. Welcome to iView World 2020. We are a human rights organization, and you are about to start watching a panel from our speaker series called Vital Voices Now. This evening's panel is called Homes in Search of a Land, and these are stories of displacement, migration, and the global refugee crisis. We have with us today Michele Cinque from Italy.
Jacob, I'm 20 years old, finished school last year, and then founded this small organization.
It's more dangerous to go out saving people than spending the summer in the swimming pool at home.
And we have Yilmaz Ozdil from Turkey, who'll be joining in for a film called Giran.
Auça,
Belediye listera bugün.
lista çe?
Şeyh Mozgut.
Şeyh Mozgut.
Abdül dayı, sen bizim belediyenin kriterlerini biliyorsun. Ama şunu senin için yapabilirim. 3-4 gün içinde sen geç bir eşe getir.
I mean, thank you for
Hi.
inviting us.
Bonjour Mina, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
Thank you, Bourgeois. We also have with us Arun Luthra, who will be helping with the translation for Yilmaz's words with us today. And finally, I'd like to introduce Debanuj Das Gupta. He is an associate professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he's the moderator for the evening.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's such an honor and pleasure to work and speak with creators of amazing cinema that represent a very important human condition, migration. So when I watched both of your films, and what struck me is that we often think of migration as like great migrations, like Michele's film, Migration Across Oceans. But it is an everyday life condition as well, as Yilmaz's film shows us. So there's borders, geo-conflicts, there's so much incredible human drama to it. Humanness, people reaching out to help, and there's the internet. So I'm curious, I want to have an open question about what drew both of you to these stories, and what do you think migration can do to cinema and cinema does to migration?
Oh, it's a complex question. Shall I go first?
Sure.
First of all, thank you very much for this occasion of speaking throughout the world. We are connecting, and it's touching in this moment. And I think it's one of the thing we miss in this moment. And I think one of the things cinema can do is take the stories that are unheard to a broader audience all over the world. And for example, I was with a simple camera on this search and rescue vessel in 2016, Iuventa, and I recorded the stories of over 2,000 people we rescued in that mission from the risk of drowning at sea. If I wasn't there, and these stories would be unearthed. And the film has been all over the world in these 2 years, and their stories have been heard a lot. So it's a super powerful tool to, I think, cinema can take unearthed stories and the voices of the weaker people to a broader audience. So it's a powerful tool. Narration, I think, it's a powerful tool at the moment, and can be revolutionary somehow. Because it can change people's mind and can have an impact. Like, for example, Iuventa was screened at the European Parliament, and this brought a lot of attention on the topic and on the work of the NGOs operating at sea. Of course, you cannot change the world, but we can, I think, help somehow with art.
Thank you.
Devanuj, if I could just have a moment to translate the question for Yilmaz so he can answer. Alors, Yilmaz, Devanuj vient de dire que la migration est un sujet, quand on en parle, on imagine un grand sujet, un sujet d'affaires étrangères, de désastres nationaux, de guerres, etc. Mais c'est aussi une question de la vie de tous les jours, que la migration est un événement de tous les jours. Et Devanuj demande pourquoi avez-vous été attiré à ce sujet en tant que cinéaste, en tant que directeur de film, et pourquoi avez-vous choisi de faire des films sur ce sujet?
D'accord. Bon, merci beaucoup pour cette occasion et merci à vous encore une fois d'avoir accepté de m'aider dans la traduction. Donc, en fait, travailler sur les sujets liés à la question d'immigration, pour moi, en tant que réalisateur kurde, c'est presque ordinaire. Moi, je suis d'une famille kurde qui vit à la frontière turco-iranienne et irakienne. Ma famille, à l'époque, il y a un siècle, a été divisée en trois. Donc, j'ai des parents en Irak, en Iran, et moi, je vis avec ma famille, ma petite famille, en Turquie.
Alors est-ce que je peux traduire petit à petit?
Exactement, oui.
So Yilmaz is saying that, well, first of all, he wants to thank you, Devanuj, and for being invited to this panel. And Yilmaz is saying that as a Turkish Kurd, for him, the issue of immigration is a personal issue and an issue of everyday life. His family has been confronted with the issue of immigration for a century, and his family has been divided in three: on the Turkish border, on the Iranian border. And so for him, it's a deeply personal issue.
Donc, c'est très ordinaire de voir dans le cinéma kurde, qui est un cinéma jeune, la frontière géopolitique, la frontière étatique en tant que paysage, en tant qu'élément de paysage cinématographique du Kurdistan dans le sens de géographie culturelle.
And in terms of Turkish cinema, which is relatively young compared to other cinema traditions.
Excuse-moi, Kurdish cinema.
Excuse me. So in terms of Kurdish cinema, which is a fairly young phenomenon relative to other cinema traditions, therefore, immigration has been a subject of Kurdish cinema since its inception. And it's a very common subject because it's such an integral part of Kurdish life.
Et donc, pour ce film-là, moi, je travaille à Mardin, qui est une ville qui a une frontière de 120 km avec la Syrie. Et donc, il y a des familles divisées entre la Turquie et la Syrie. J'ai essayé de trouver une métaphore à travers laquelle je peux traiter cette notion de frontière et aussi le cas actuel des Kurdes.
And in the case of his own film, Yilmaz says that he picked a city. Est-ce que je suis correct que la ville s'appelle Amardi?
Mardin.
So the subject of his film is a town called Mardi, and its proximity to both the Syrian and Turkish borders allowed him to create a film where he attempted to find a metaphor for the idea of international borders that divide families and divide a single nation or a single culture.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. I just have a follow-up question for Yilmaz. So since you said Kurdish cinema, is a relatively newer phenomenon, and there's this urgency to tell the stories of immigration and migration. Does being a refugee and transnational migration, being caught in conflict, does the migration in itself produce Kurdish cinema as an impetus for creating this network? Yeah.
Donc, Debanouche vous demande, Yilmaz, si, comme vous êtes un Turc kurde, est-ce que vous pensez que le cinéma kurde a été créé dans un sens comme une réaction au sujet de l'immigration et la migration? Est-ce que bon, c'est un sujet central du cinéma kurde lui-même?
Exactement, parce que en fait, le cinéma comme outil de communication, comme art de communication, est reçu chez les Kurdes comme un moyen de propagande et plutôt de la démonstration de son identité, l'existence de son identité ethnique. Donc, les Kurdes ont été niés pendant longtemps en Turquie et la langue kurde a été interdite jusqu'au début des années 1990. Et donc, on n'avait pas d'autre moyen en tant que peuple qui vivait à l'époque une culture orale. On n'avait pas d'autre moyen de s'exprimer. Et quand les premiers films kurdes ont été tournés, les Kurdes ont tout de suite adopté le cinéma comme art de la démonstration de son existence, vraiment. Et aussi de moyens de communication avec le reste du monde, avec soi-même.
So Yilmaz is saying that, yes, absolutely, Debanouche, that from its inception, Kurdish cinema was really, its impetus was to communicate with the world about Kurdish issues, Kurdish culture, because of the oppression that Kurds have endured in Turkey. This was their only outlet to really express their political point of view, and to share with the world their circumstances, and to really have a voice on the international stage.
Right. And so, I mean, to build off, thank you for the answer, and thank you, Arun. It's lovely seeing you after a long time, but thank you for the translation. It's a lot of work and labor, so I want to acknowledge that. But and so building on what Yilmaz has been saying, I wanted to ask Michele, because you started off with saying how the film as a medium can change opinions. For instance, Iuventa was shown in the European Parliament. So I'm curious what drew you to Iuventa? Well, not only Iuventa, like some of your other films, like Sicily Jazz. It's about a Sicilian migrant to New Orleans, the first recorded sort of jazz album. So I'm curious what draws you to sort of migration, music, and then the ocean, in this case, which is a whole different layer.
Thank you, Debanouche. So it's actually Iuventa was, and I don't know, when I decide to do movies, it's something that is a kind of irrational feeling. It's not that I go to schools to present the film and they ask me why you do this film, I always say because I felt in love with the story. I think to do especially a documentary, independent documentaries, you need to be really in love and really like passionate for telling that story in particular, and why you yourself you have to have a direct link with the story. Otherwise, you wouldn't find the strength to go through all this, to do like Iuventa was 300 hours of shooting around like many countries in the Mediterranean Sea, in open waters, in international waters, with pirates, with Libyan coast guards. It was quite risky as well, and especially like. It's the productive process is such an issue to go through a film like this, because it has been 8 months of editing and and so a lot of money basically at the end of the game. So you need to find that, and you need to be convinced. So I actually Iuventa, I get on board on the ship, and it was quite surprisingly, like I heard this story through a newspaper that a bunch of 20-year-old German students just bought an old vessel, an old ship from 1969, and they remodel it uh, to and made the Iuventa a search and rescue vessel. And they went into, they were at that point, it was 2016, it was the spring 2016, they were about to go in open sea to do their first mission. And the founder of this organization was 19-year-old. And you know, they like, to me, it was revolutionary. The fact that a 19-year-old boy decided to live its, you know, wealthy and luxury life in Munich and in Berlin, and he went with a bunch of friends in this, you know, in this risking his life basically, and to just for a moral duty, for the fact that he couldn't recognize, he couldn't watch himself at the mirror in the morning, if you know, because at that moment there were maybe, you know, in just for the audience that maybe it's listening to us from other areas of the world, in the Mediterranean Sea, we have a huge, it's the deadliest border in the world. Like 30,000 people have lost their life in the last 15 years. So it's a really, it's a disaster. I mean, there are shipwrecks every year. And in 2015, when this Jakob Schoene was the name of this boy, 19-year-old, after there was a shipwreck in which 900 people had lost their lives in the Mediterranean Sea in one night. So he decided that it was too much for him. It was too much to support it, and he had to do something. And for me, this you know, this vision and this strength that a 20-year-old boy that decided not to go to university, but to go in, you know, to become you know, like to change completely his life. And so did hundreds of young people from all over the world that joined the NGO. There was people from Australia, from US, from Europe. It was really a call, a moral call of duty for a lot of young people. And so this was why I decided to get on board. And I really, sometimes I say Iuventa is not a film on migration, because I think it's a film about our dreams as young Europeans, that how we want to build our country, you know, how we want to build, because if we don't, if we let people drown at our doorstep, how can we speak about civil rights, or about, you know, humanism, or the basic values of Europe? And so basically, I think each stories I tell with in my movies, it's about a special feeling of love that I find exploring the world and observing what is around us.
That is amazing, because I think the power of storytelling, the urge to build and imagine, dream a different world. I think, you know, I'm a theorist and I do research as an academic, but I definitely think what cinema and art does for us is it gives us a different vision. It helps us imagine visually the human condition and a different vision. So I wanted to sort of resonate two things that both of you have said, and that is, you know, in Yilmaz, in your case, you find a town that's in between two countries to sort of narrate that in-betweenness. And Michele, you are in the ocean, you know, and I thought like the film was as much also a story about Mediterranean. And so I'm just curious, how you see the role of the narrator. Like Michele, you were talking about, you know, being an interlocutor, feeling like an ally, wanting to do something for people who are out there stranded, dying. And Yilmaz, in your case, I often think about it because I identify you as a migrant myself. Doing research about immigration is a personal drive to tell the stories. So I'm curious about how you see the relationship between somebody who's telling a first person story or coming from that place of having been a refugee or a migrant, and then, or, you know, somebody who is moved by the story and is working to be an ally, to do something for that condition, you know. So I'm curious how you think both of your cinema represents two different kinds of narration in some sense, you know.
Definitely. You want to translate for Arun? You want to translate for Yilmaz?
Sure. Alors, Yilmaz, Debanouche parle du fait que bon, ton film et le film de Michele utilisent deux différents lieux géographiques en tant que le centre de leur film. Alors, dans ton cas, c'est la ville dont tu parlais. Et Debanouche disait que, bon, vous avez tous les deux une grande passion pour ce sujet de la migration. Et bon, c'est ça l'impetus pour créer vos films. Et Desmanos, je vous demandais, de votre point de vue, quel est le rôle du narrateur du film et du point de vue du film en tant que partager le sujet et comment dire, de partager le sujet et la différence que le point de vue du cinéaste peut faire en tant que raconter l'histoire de migration.
D'accord. Bon, c'est une bonne question d'ailleurs parce que dans mon film, moi au début et à la fin du film, j'ai essayé d'insérer les animaux, les ânes, comme en fait des narrateurs qui débutent l'histoire et qui finalisent l'histoire. Donc, pourquoi j'ai fait ça? Parce que moi, je trouve que j'étais très focalisé sur le fait de raconter cette guerre qui est très politisée, très internationalisée, mais dont on ne voit pas les conséquences tragiques que vivaient les réfugiés, malgré tous les moyens de communication, malgré cette ère de communication visuelle, etc. Et moi, je me suis centré sur la naïveté. En fait, pour moi, la naïveté est quelque chose de très caractéristique qui peut unir les gens. Et j'ai trouvé en fait que les âmes que vous voyez dans le film avaient une image très homocentrique d'ailleurs, mais très proche à cette idée de naïveté. Donc, pour moi, c'était nécessaire d'insérer les âmes comme narrateurs à côté de mon personnage principal. Donc, parce que les animaux aussi sont des victimes de guerre et donc à travers cette décision, j'ai essayé de faire sortir en fait de la narration du film de point de vue, si vous pouvez dire, un peu trop culturel, un peu trop propagandiste et homocentrique. Je ne sais pas si j'ai réussi ou pas. Voilà.
So Devanush is saying that he feels it's a really good question because point of view is so crucial. And in fact, in Yilmaz's film, he says he bookends his film by focusing on non-humans, on animals, and how they are affected by the circumstances of the war. Yilmaz is saying that this war in Syria is something that has been discussed all over the world. And it's been very much politicized. However, at the same time, in the narrative of the war, the actual everyday impact of the war is ignored. and the everyday costs of the war. And in fact, there's a naivete to that way of talking about the war. And you can talk about the war in very propagandist ways and very politicized ways, but then you completely leave out the actual day-to-day, horrifying cost of the war. And so, he said these animals in the film are just as much victims of war as anybody else. And by bookending the film with them and seeing it from their point of view, you transcend that naivete, and you're able to contrast that with the experience of the central character of his film as well, and really bring several perspectives to the issue that he's covering.
Thank you.
On my case, I mean, I find very interesting Yilmaz's answer as well, because there is also, I think, central to Iuventa is the naivete of the protagonists that are so young that it's my film. It's a coming of age story in which the dreams of young people crash with reality, and the reality of a war. The Mediterranean Sea and the border, the water border with Libya is a war border. Actually, it's full of military ships. It's full of pirates, and the Libyan Coast Guard. It's so-called Libyan Coast Guard. It's actually militias. So it's a really, and they find themselves in the middle of the reality of a border of war. Of course, it's a completely different border that Syria is, and it's a completely different naivete. And also the style of the both films are completely different. I was seeing this morning Yilmaz's film that it's amazingly done and well shot, and it's so touching. So, and Iuventa, it's a completely different film because it wasn't written. It's an action film basically. I had to be with this bunch of young people at sea and on land for 1.5 years, filming every day. Basically, like we shot. I was shooting alone in the boat without also a sound guy, because they decided to bring me at sea just 10 minutes before the ship left the dock. Like I went to Malta and I wasn't expected to go on mission with my protagonists because it was too late. I mean, I just knew them by phone since 10 days. And I brought in Malta a luggage full of optics and hard drives and my camera, and they welcomed me on board just 10 minutes before the ship left the dock. So I was completely unprepared on one side. But then I wanted to do an observative documentary. So I want to observe and like try to find the way the camera could be as much as possible invisible, like as invisible as possible. And I think it was successful this somehow because also I didn't speak the language of the people that I was filming. So I don't speak German, and they were speaking almost German on board. So like they were ignoring me. So this like kind of became a faster way to become invisible, because on documentaries usually there is this it's a task to be invisible. Like in observative documentaries, to be successful, you have to kind of hide yourself. Like the role of the narrator is there doing everything, but somehow has to completely disappear from the decisions. And so it was mainly like I decided to put a voiceover, like a very delicate voiceover. It's just intervening 5 times in the film, and at the end of the editing to be like to create an empathy with me and why I decided to join this story, and why I think this was a story that needed to be told. So it's you cannot choose very much, but on an observative film. But on the other way, you choose on every frame you do, and it's a lot. It's a jazz movie, I would say. It's improvising all the time. It's improvising with the reality, and that's what I love about documentaries.
Yilmaz, will you take us to the scene of your film? What was your process like? Since Michele has really taken us to that place, I'm curious what it was like to shoot with the animal, the donkey. And I mean, and that's so touching, the human animal bond and the need for the animal in human life and in everyday life, and you place that every day in the exceptional war, right? In the sort of in between the borders. So what was it like to film there?
Alors, Yilmaz, Devanu, je te demande de parler avec un peu plus de détails, comme Michele vient de le faire, à propos du processus de créer votre film. C'est vraiment si touchant de voir la relation entre l'âne et l'être humain, et vraiment de voir le contraste entre la vie de tous les jours et l'impact de la guerre sur la vie de tous les jours, et avec l'idée de la guerre qui est bon, à un point de vue plus politique ou propagandiste.
D'accord. En fait, j'aimerais parler d'une vidéo dont je suis inspiré au début de la guerre de Syrie. J'ai vu une vidéo sur YouTube dans laquelle on voyait un fonctionnaire de la mairie de municipalité de Mardin qui avait organisé, en fait, soi-disant, une cérémonie de partir à la retraite pour des animaux qui travaillaient dans le service d'assassinat, si j'ai bien prononcé.
Alors, je traduis.
D'accord.
So Yilmaz says that actually the kind of initial germ, the seed of this film was a video that he found on YouTube of a town official in Mardin talking about the creation of a very touching idea of creating a program of retirement, a retirement program for the working animals in Mardin.
À la même époque, en fait, il y avait des vagues de migration, des immigrés, des réfugiés de Syrie s'installer en Mardin. Mais comme Mardin est une ville très touristique de Turquie, c'est une ville antique de plus de 5000 ans. En fait, dans les médias, si vous voulez, dans les grands médias de Turquie, on ne parlait pas des réfugiés, mais on parlait de comment en fait, comment renforcer le tourisme de Mardin ou d'ailleurs, etc. Et on utilisait beaucoup ces images des ânes qui travaillaient à la municipalité comme un objet de marketing. Voilà.
So Mardin is actually a tourist center. It's an ancient town. And at the time, actually the idea that there was not much discussion of issues of migration of refugees from the war in the general public, but in fact the concern was how can we boost and increase tourism to Mardin, and there was a lot of focus on these animals, these lovely donkeys, being a way to attract more tourism.
Je me suis demandé peut-être il faut renverser cette image des ânes pour les faire les narrateurs d'une histoire qui raconte la guerre au lieu de les utiliser, les instrumentaliser comme des objets de marketing, de tourisme à cette époque de guerre.
So Yilmaz said what he decided is he wanted to flip that script upside down, and in fact think of the donkeys as a way, as a beginning point to tell the story of the war and of refugees and of migration, rather than using these animals as simply tools of marketing for the sake of generating tourism.
J'ai vécu quelques difficultés, en fait. J'ai rencontré quelques difficultés à l'époque de réalisation, des difficultés financières comme tout le monde, mais aussi des difficultés peut-être que je peux qualifier de politiques, des difficultés politiques. Une des premières étapes difficiles que je devais traverser, c'était de trouver des comédiennes qui prononçaient bien le kurde, qui correspondaient à peu près en fait, au paysage, si vous voulez, anthropologique des populations immigrées. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle j'ai fait venir deux acteurs du Kurdistan irakien. En fait, les deux premiers acteurs, mes protagonistes, sont de Kurdistan irakien.
And so at the beginning, while creating the film, he of course encountered challenges and problems, as all filmmakers do, financial issues, of course, but then also political issues. And he said that one of his one of the first challenges he faced was to find actors who, first of all, could pronounce Kurdish well and could speak Kurdish well, and that also had the right look. He talks about it in French, the anthropological map of the region, right? And the idea of finding people whose look and whose demeanor would fit the culture that they are portraying. And so as a result of this, he actually, the first two actors that he cast were Kurds brought from Iraq.
Bon, j'ai parlé peut-être beaucoup, mais je vais dire deux, trois phrases encore. En fait, en tant que quelqu'un qui vivait à la frontière, qui n'était pas dans le centre, moi, après avoir réalisé le film, j'ai vécu beaucoup de problèmes parce que je ne possédais pas des moyens des bons moyens pour la distribution du film. Donc, on n'était pas à Istanbul, on était très loin, même à l'époque de réalisation du film, il nous manquait du matériel technique. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle en fait, il a pris beaucoup de temps pour rendre visible mon film, si vous voulez, dans le cercle de la distribution internationale, parce que les premiers festivals n'acceptaient pas. Je n'avais même pas le moyen d'exporter en fait le film dans le format DCP parce que c'était très cher. Très cher. Donc, ça a pris beaucoup de temps, mais heureusement, le film est présenté jusqu'à cette heure-ci dans plus de 95 festivals internationaux et il a eu 23 prix, dont un de prix Oscar qualifying.
Another issue for Yilmaz was the fact that, you know, this where being located geographically simply in a place that's far away from the centers of cinema. He says, you know, I'm not in Istanbul, I'm not in a big city. So it was very hard for me. On one level, I had problems simply of finding the equipment that I needed and bringing it to where I was. Also, I had issues of having contacts for distribution. So it took him a very long time to find the avenues necessary to get his film out there in front of audiences. And he's incredibly happy that, you know, he's been able to finally have the film shown in many places. And in fact, the film has won 3 prizes so far. And he even had technical issues in terms of converting the film to the specific format necessary, just because of the expense of that. So there are a lot of these very practical issues that he's also discussing. Oh, you're muted, Debanush.
Michele, you want to add something to that?
I mean, it's amazing how he came out with this film, Yilmaz, and congratulations for the effort. I can imagine as a filmmaker, how can it be to be? I was looking in the map. Mardin, because I didn't know where it was, and thanks to your film now I know. It's really far away and near to Syria. So and congratulations, really, once again. It's a wonderful film. And I see that you have a lot of love also for your story, and the need to tell the story. And I think that it's a common denominator for it's a common characteristic on our films. And so I think it's really important to that the films are out, and thanks to also these digital occasions, we are now really happy to have the chance to show it in India again, and and as well in US.
Well, the digital now, it's interesting that you bring it up. The digital now is such an important part of migration, right? I mean, digital communication enables ideas to migrate very, very fast across borders. But it's when it comes to humans, the crossing of the borders is sort of closed down. Something we say in migration studies is that there is denationalization of the economy, but renationalization of borders, right? And I think both of your films brings that out. And what I wanted to also ask is, I wanted to go to a scene, Michele, where one of the young people who has been rescued says every day was like between life and death, right? And then he says, I'm afraid of the ocean. I've never been on the ocean. And then Yilmaz, there's a similar scene when the young person and when the two of them comes up with a solution about the donkey, the grandfather goes, "Are you crazy? Do you know how many spans there are between death and life?" That was the translation for me that came on. So I'm very curious about, this is truly a drama about life and death, and for many refugees, many caught at sea, many caught at border, it is really about this, either you make it or it's facing death. So what is it like to tell a story that is so grippingly about life and death, and so many people don't make it in this? What is it like to say and represent that cinematically?
For me, it was shocking. We had two girls dying on the vessel in our hands. They were 21, 22-year old, and I mean, because we were experiencing everything on our skin, and as Europe, Europeans that usually don't go to see that. You don't have a glimpse of what is happening on the borders of war, and privileged people
or even detention centers, because detention centers, as in Sweden they call expulsion centers, they are hidden from public view. I mean, refugee camps are hidden from public view. I tell my students, at least in the US, there is Orange is the New Black. It's like popular representation of jails, but there's no popular representation in public culture of detention centers and refugee condition, right? So I think independent cinema has this tremendous burden of showing that which is hidden from our eyes completely.
Yeah, the Manush, you were saying about this scene about the sea, the perception of the sea as is a desert of water, is a desert of salt water. When you are there 18, 20 days without seeing land, and just spotting these overcrowded and completely poor quality vessels, terrible, where there are 120, 150, 110 people on each, and every minute is the minute that they can shipwreck. It's completely surreal, that sensation. And I was writing a text for a book that a painter asked me to write an introduction for his book. And I was meditating on this fact that actually, for many of the refugees, for most of the refugees, Iuventa has rescued, that were 14,000 in 1 year of operation before they've been criminalized and are now under accusation, the volunteers of my film. But in this year, like most of these people were completely unaware of the fact that the Mediterranean Sea can be, the last step on Earth that they would make, because many of them would think that it was a river. How big is this river? I was even told.
Or a luxury holiday spot, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
Mediterranean Sea is also a site of luxury vacation.
When I was back from the boat, I couldn't go to the beach, and because I was always spotting the horizon, and when I see a boat, I was, I had this sense of anxiety and fear that there was some people to rescue there, because we were for 20 days spotting the horizon with the binoculars, in searching for life to rescue, and we had to be fast, and and there are many boats that are not spotted there, and they just go like that. So but just to finish the concept, I think that it's a place, it's like the border of AIDS, of the land of dead people, the AIDS in the mythological Greek mythology, like
You mean Hades, Michele?
Hades. Yes,
Hades.
sorry, sorry,
Hades,
Arun.
yes.
Hades. Yeah, Ade in Italiano, sorry. In Italian, it's so
Capisco, capisco.
Yeah, and so it's the border between, I think, because many of them were saying, oh, wow, in Libya, the sea is black and here is blue. So I got this sensation that it's a so simple sentence, but at the end, you get the feeling that even in Libya, even the sea has a different color, just because they were living at night. But, these nights remember me of really they were coming out of the world of that people. So it's we centered the film on the Mediterranean Sea, on search and rescue, but we were just spotting a light on the point of the iceberg, which in Libya there is a huge violations of human rights each day, each hours, each minute, and detention center, and they are financed by Europe, basically. So it's really, it's a very complex, it's a complex thing when you start a glimpse, having a glimpse of this brutal dimension of life and death, and how much is the proximity between these two concepts can be. For a privileged people, it's not so common to perceive that.
So since, I'll come to Yilmaz, I'll give Yilmaz also the chance to answer this life and death question, but I just want to quickly add, latch on to a sort of a closing question for both of you at the same time, is, how much of the film, how did you produce the film? How did you raise the funding? There's a, and like, how has the film been accepted and circulated, right? So we were talking about life and death, and in Ilma, in your film, I was seeing like how, in order for like, it's such a sweet idea, innocent idea, that old donkeys should not work. So somebody is trying to be very humane to the donkeys, but it is actually making certain people's life very inhuman. In this, at the same time, the refugee condition is a very inhuman condition in that sense, right? And so for Michele, similarly, it's like some people just don't get to enter Europe, like Fortress Europe. Some people just don't get to be considered worthy of living. So I wanted to ask Yilmaz about that as well. What is it like to tell the story? But also, what was it like, producing, circulating, what is the life of the cinema now? also.
Alors, deux questions, une question en deux parties, Yilmaz. Premièrement, Debanouche parlait du fait que vos films vraiment sont des questions de vie ou de mort. Tu as vraiment ce sens d'urgence. Et il parlait, bon, je n'ai pas vu votre film, mais il parle du moment où ils essayent de trouver une solution pour l'âne, je pense, pour prendre sa retraite, le vieil homme et le garçon. Et le vieil homme essaye d'expliquer au garçon, est-ce que tu comprends comme la vie et la mort sont si proches l'un de l'autre, et l'idée de faire un film qui parle d'un sujet, du sujet de vie ou de mort, et l'urgence et la proximité de la vie et la mort. Et puis aussi, Debanouche vous demandait de parler un peu des problèmes de distribution, de financement, et comment vous avez réussi à faire votre film, et quelles étaient les méthodes, les idées que vous avez trouvées pour distribuer votre film.
D'accord. Merci beaucoup pour la traduction. Encore une fois, ça a duré beaucoup parce que vous devez être fatigué. Donc, si je réponds à la première question, c'est vrai qu'il y a une phrase conversation entre le grand-père et son neveu qui est venu de Syrie et qui veut aller en Syrie pour ramener son âme. En fait, quand il lance cette idée avec son oncle, son oncle lui demande s'il connaît la distance entre la mort et la vie. Donc, pour moi, c'est un signifiant de la frontière, des frontières visibles et invisibles. Donc, la frontière est déjà une ligne de démarcation entre la mort et la vie, l'inégalité et égalité. Et surtout pour les Kurdes qui sont divisés entre 4 États et qui sont obligés de traverser les frontières illégalement. Par exemple, mon père, il était un contrebande, il devait faire de la contrebande pour nourrir sa famille, mais quand il traversait la frontière, il allait chez nos parents, encore une fois, en Irak, en Iran, etc. Donc, cette phrase est vraiment, ça signifie la double face de la frontière, pour tout le monde, mais surtout pour les Kurdes. Donc, c'était une façon très légère de parler de cette absence d'État pour les Kurdes, parce que les Kurdes n'ont pas un État indépendant, mais qui sont obligés de traverser, et chaque fois quand il y a la guerre en Irak, par exemple au début des années 80, au moment du régime de Saddam Hussein, les Kurdes irakiens sont venus vers la Turquie, et c'était les Kurdes de Turquie et la Turquie qui les ont accueillis, et quand il y a un problème en Turquie, les Kurdes traversent la frontière pour fuir en Irak. Voilà, c'était une façon de raconter ce paradoxe et cette réalité de frontière. C'était la réponse de la première question.
So Yilmaz is saying that, yes, indeed, you know, in my film, when the young boy is saying he wants to bring the donkey to Syria to save it, and the uncle says, do you understand the distance that you need to go? Do you understand how far it is? And then, you know, and then this idea of, you know, what is the distance between life and death? Yilmaz is saying that there's a profound metaphor there, especially from the point of view of a stateless people like the Kurds, who are divided among 4 countries. And so he gives the example of his father, who had to be a smuggler to earn a living for his family. So on the one hand, he is crossing borders, you know, in a technically illegal way to support his family, and at the same time, he himself is a stateless person. And the borders between the nations become also the idea of lines between life and death. And the ability to cross a border can be the difference between life and death. As another example, in the time of the Saddam Hussein regime, Iraqi Kurds had to cross the border into Turkey and were welcomed by Turkish Kurds. And he said, as a member of the Kurdish community, when there's a problem in one nation state where the Kurds live, well, the Kurds are welcomed by their fellow Kurds in another nation. So the idea of crossing the border to save your life is another powerful metaphor. And this phrase that the uncle speaks to the young boy about, do you really understand the distance that you have to travel, is he said, in a way, a bit of a light, a light moment in the film, but it provides a metaphor for this profound question.
Si je réponds rapidement à la deuxième question, en fait, bon, vraiment, ça a été dur de prendre une décision qui a servi quand même. Moi, après avoir compris qu'on ne va pas être accepté par les grands festivals qui vont nous aider à rendre visible le film, j'ai pris une décision, j'ai envoyé le film à des petits, entre guillemets, des petits festivals. Et donc, à travers ces petits festivals, que j'ai réussi à rendre visible mon film. Ça a bien marché, c'était un risque, un grand risque pour moi. Mais au fur et à mesure, j'ai compris, en fait, moi j'étais aussi un peu amateur dans cette question de distribution parce que moi je suis à la fois réalisateur, scénariste et producteur de films. J'étais un peu seul, donc chaque fois quand je devais communiquer avec un festival, je me servais de Google Translator pour écrire un email en français, le traduire en anglais, et ça a passé comme ça pendant des mois et des mois, ça continue comme ça. Mais heureusement, à partir de la deuxième moitié de cette année, le film a bien marché, on a eu des prix et il y a eu des festivals qui nous ont demandé de leur envoyer le film. C'était très bien. Est-ce que ça aurait résolu nos problèmes de distribution? Non, pour le moment, mais il y a une semaine, j'ai signé un contrat avec une compagnie qui travaille avec les Oscars d'ailleurs, Shorts TV. Et donc, c'est eux qui ont acheté le droit de la distribution du film en Inde, en Amérique latine, Amérique du Sud et en Europe. Ça va pour le moment, je travaille sur un projet de long métrage. J'ai demandé de financement auprès de la ministère de Culture en Turquie et j'ai trouvé une petite maison de production en Allemagne. Je suis en train de chercher des coproducteurs en France et ailleurs. Voilà.
Yilmaz says that it was a very difficult decision for him to take at one point, which was that he started to realize that these so-called big festivals were not accepting his film and that these big festivals are really the avenues to find distribution. So when he was confronted with that reality, he decided, okay, I will approach the so-called smaller festivals. And he said that, after he started doing that, the film gained momentum and he actually was able to get the film shown in front of audiences and actually reach the public that he wanted to. And for him personally, he said, he's not a professional film distributor. He's a professional filmmaker, but the distribution is something outside of his the core of his filmmaking skill set. And so it was a very tedious process. He would write emails to festivals. He would compose them in French and then have to translate them into English and then send them out. And it was this very slow, very deliberate process. But eventually he gained momentum and was able to get his film in front of an audience. And then eventually through that, he was able to sign a contract with a television company called Short TV for distribution in Latin America and Europe. And that was a big step forward. And then Yilmaz also alluded to a project which he's working on now, which is a feature film. J'ai pas bien compris, Yilmaz, tu parles de ton film de long métrage, et tu parlais en fait, tu as parlé de communication avec le cinéma turc et autre chose aussi. Je me souviens pas.
En fait, pour mon prochain projet de film long métrage, qui est aussi une histoire d'immigration interne, si je peux le dire, j'ai demandé la subvention auprès de la ministère de la Culture de Turquie et j'ai trouvé une maison de production en Allemagne. Je suis en train de chercher d'autres coproducteurs en France et ailleurs.
I see. Right. So the Ministry of Culture in Turkey he's already been able to find some financing for this feature-length film, which also tells a story of migration and immigration. And he's also been in touch with a production company in Germany, which is now tied to the project, and he's continuing to search for more co-producers to make this film.
Thank you, because I wanted to sort of, bring out the process of, the business and the process that goes behind telling these important stories. Michele, do you want to, comment on that about your own film? We are at 5:05, but, I want to honor both of your time. So, we'll wrap up after that.
Thank you, the partners. So yes, for me it was, as I tell you before, I decided to jump on this adventure of Iuventa without having a financial backup, without having a production company, without having the Ministry of Culture behind me, no money. Like we were I have my film production company, and we had some private funding. So I followed these guys for a year. With my private funding, and then something happened that made Iuventa a political manifesto. That was the fact that the ship became like the first ship to be stopped by the Italian authorities, and the guys, my protagonists, were accused of aiding and abetting illegal immigration. And so they become kind of the first, and then there were 13 ships independent from the civil society ships in the Mediterranean Sea in 2016. Now there is only one operating because all the ships have been stopped, and the volunteers of these NGOs accused by European and Italian authorities of different violations. Basically, there was from 2017 a war against solidarity in Europe, and Iuventa was part of the counter narrative, and I'm really proud of that because it became all the narrative, the so-called the narrative of the governments and of the migration policy in Europe become aggressive and against these young people. And Iuventa was the proof that they were they were doing this for moral reason and not for economical reason. That they were actually the only thing you can accuse them was of naivety. So it's everything changed from one day to another, and I've been called by television doing a lot of direct interviews about the film, and the film actually then was acquired by Warsale, Rai Cinema, that is our main founder of independent cinema in Italy, acquired the rights, and ZDF jumped on the project. And so from that on, the film, it was a bet, but I think it's and this was on a producing level was won by we won this bet, but actually it's I'm really proud that it actually helps my protagonist to gain again a voice, and this is, I think, the best scenario you can have with an impact social impact film, which Iuventa is.
Well, we could go on. There's so much in the themes and the films. I wanted to honor your time and Arun's time. I'm really grateful as a researcher in migration studies to be in conversation with artists and cinema producers and filmmakers who think and bring us theory in a different way, and like shows. I would love to show both of your films in my classes. At this point, I want to end there. I do want to say one last thing is I just think thank you, Mina and Engendered, for amplifying your films and the voices that you bring. And for me, watching both the films, I urge the audience to watch both the films together back to back, because I think on one hand, there is the story of the refugee condition, the stateless condition. And on the other hand, because that's the othering that is happening, right? The other. And then on the other hand, you have, young people from Europe, trying to reach out to the other in the middle of the ocean, right? And that is the world we want to build, is where we stop othering people, that we reach out against othering and build a world filled with love and dignity, where everybody gets to live and not have to make that choice between life and death. So I want to bring in Mina to give some closing comments, and if you have any questions for us.
Thank you so much. I only want to say thank you. Both your films are absolutely wonderful. They're gems, and we are very excited to have them in our lineup. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you,
Thank you, Mina.
Yilmaz. And finally, thank you, Debanuj, for this wonderful conversation, for moderating.